From CLSA Research, I'm Alexandra Lee, and this is Director's Cut, a series dedicated to getting to know the people behind the world's most interesting and influential organisations. Today, I'm honoured to interview today's guest, Dr. Mark Mobius, who may be one of the most, let's say, intriguing people in the investment industry. He's been called the Bald Eagle, the Pied Piper of emerging markets, and even the Indiana Jones of emerging markets. He's worked at Franklin Templeton Investments for 30 plus years, was president of the first investment company in Taiwan, and now runs Mobius Capital Partners. Within that time, he's managed over $40 billion in assets, invested in over 5,000 companies. But his life has been more than just managing money. He spent his youth studying the fine arts, psychology, and Japanese civilization, then ran a survey research firm before selling Snoopy toys in Asia. He's also told his life story through a comic book. So, it looks like there is more to this man than meets the eye. But beyond the personal life, he goes far and wide to find the next best idea. What are his thoughts on the opportunities that come up? Stick around to see. Dr. Mobius, welcome to our Asean Forum 2023.
Thank you. Pleasure being with you.
It's such a pleasure having you. So let's get straight into the questions. I've got quite a few here, so bear with me. Now, you were born to German and Puerto Rico parents, immigrants, yes, if I'm correct, in New York. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. Yes. Tell me about the relationship that you had with them growing up.
Well, you know, I grew up in an environment where the world was at war. You must remember that was World War II. And I remember my mother had to work in the Grumman airplane factory. You know, everybody was working in those days, women and men. If they weren't at war, they were working in factories. And my father, of course, being German, was kind of a strange situation because he had relatives back in Germany, and there was a possibility of him being drafted in the American Army. At the end of the day, what happened is because of a hernia problem he had, he wasn't drafted, but it was a difficult time for us.
And the relationship you had with him, what was that like?
Oh, very close. I mean, it was quite a situation because you had a guy who spoke German when he met my mother. My mother spoke Spanish, and they had to communicate in English, so they both had to learn English. Of course, my mother knew more English than my father knew English, but it was quite a romance that they had.
Well, how old were you when they moved you to New York, or you?
Well, I was born in New York,
okay.
Not New York City, but Long Island, New York, a place called Hempstead. And my childhood was very nice because we had a great grammar school, they call grammar school, primary school, and high school. In fact, I still keep contact with my high school. I give them a scholarship every year for students who are doing well in arts and business. And we were near a place called Jones Beach. I don't know whether you've ever heard of Jones Beach. Jones Beach is probably one of the most beautiful beaches in the world. Long, long stretches of white sand. And so we spent our summers there. It was just wonderful.
And you were talking about that you had a very close relationship with your parents. Did that go throughout your entire adolescence and young adult?
Yes, it did. Unfortunately, my father died when I was in high school. So it was quite difficult because my brother at that time was going to Cornell. He had to leave because there was no money to pay for his education. And I had to get a scholarship in order to go to Boston University. I went to Boston University, did my master's degree there, my bachelor's and master's. And then after that, I studied at various universities, University of Wisconsin, Kyoto University, University of New Mexico, and finally ended up at MIT, where I did my economics PhD.
Right, and your father dying early, did that shape the man that I see before me today?
Oh, definitely. I mean, it meant that I had to see for myself, make money in order to go to college, to live in university and so forth. So I was working throughout my teenage years and also early adolescence.
So a self-made man.
Yeah, you might say that. But you must remember that no one really is self-made because you get help along the way. I got a scholarship and I had a lot of mentors who helped a lot. So it was very nice.
So you think that having that support whether that came from your parents or mentors, played a fundamental part in who you are.
Oh, definitely. It's very important. And of course, now that I have money, I can give back. So it's very satisfying.
Can you walk me through a little bit of how you do that with people, whether that's young people you work with or just throughout your personal life? How does that play out?
Yes, what I do now is I give a scholarship to my high school and also the university, Boston University. And it's usually a way to meet these young people and mentor them and tell them about what I'm doing and how they can also further their work. And of course, we have our own company now, and we hire people that want to learn about how we invest. So it's quite a nice thing.
Speaking of young people, paint a picture of what you were like as a young man growing up in New York.
When you look back, you really realize that your head was in a spin in a way, because when you're young and energetic and when you're a teenager, your life is very emotional, let's put it that way.
Yes.
It still is emotional, but particularly when you're young like that, you are having fun, you're having various disasters along the way. And so in many ways that experience does shape your further life, but more importantly, you learn things along the way, particularly if you're looking after yourself. So that's very important.
Well, I think we learn a lot from, I wouldn't say suffering, but the lessons that we learn, right?
Exactly.
So what challenges did you face when you were growing up? Did you have to touch into your vulnerability to grow up and become a man?
I think the biggest challenge was to find out what I wanted to do in my adult life. Even when I finished my PhD, I really didn't want to leave university. I wanted to continue to be a professional student. And when I finally did leave, I had to examine, where do I go from here? What kind of vocation do I adopt? And the best was research, because then you can continuously learn. And one of the reasons why I'm in the investment management industry is because it's a great way to continue learning, because any place you go, you have to learn. If you're a global investor in particular, you have to learn. So it's a perfect kind of profession for me.
Am I right in assessing that you didn't want to leave university because, one, you wanted to keep learning, and two, because you didn't know what you wanted to do? It is.
That's right. I mean, if you're a professional student, how are you going to earn money doing that? What is the what is the profession you're going to choose? And of course, when you're a fund manager, investment manager, you have to be learning all the time. There's no let up. And that's the great thing about our profession.
So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I spoke to quite a few people at this forum. I had dinner with a couple of clients last night and some colleagues, and they describe you as being a character. You've even made headlines just over the weekend. How do you draw that sort of response from people? Why do you think that is?
I think it's because I'm quite open and honest. In other words, when I'm in an interview with the press or talking to anyone, I try to be as honest as I can be. Not by being rude, but by just being open and honest and telling people what I think. Because sometimes you don't get that from a lot of people. People tend to hide. And I don't, I'm not in that way. I tend to be very open.
Now, you recently went to Penang and Brazil, is that right?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you did there, what opportunities you found?
Well, I went to Rio de Janeiro, and you know what happens in Rio.
Tell us.
Well, if you've never been to the Rio Carnival, you've missed the greatest show on earth. It's quite something. It starts at about 8 o'clock in the evening and goes to early morning, 7 in the morning. And it's a constant display of incredible costumes, dance, music, etc. So I try to make it as often as I can. And the last 2 years, of course, because of COVID, it was not, there was no carnival. So this was the first year, and it was the best carnival I've ever gone to. And of course, whenever I go I combine it with work. So I went to see a few companies in Sao Paulo, and so combined it with pleasure and business.
What is pleasure for you? What do you enjoy doing? What are your hobbies and passions?
Well, I love music. I love the theater. I love to do any kind of entertainment, dance. I love, and also I like to read. I'm a big reader, which is important. In our job, we have to be reading all the time, and of course, I like to exercise. So every morning, I'll get on the stationary bicycle, read a book, and cycle. So it's a combination of these things that I like.
This was not planned, by the way, for people watching, because this segues perfectly into my next question. So at the dinner last night, I was talking to someone who said that when you used to work at Franklin Templeton days, you had sell-side teach-ins, and you asked someone to do a race. You challenged them to a race in Cancun, and apparently you outran them several times. So this was a while back, but you clearly had this zest for life, a lot of energy. And speaking of books, so I'm about to start a book called Lifespan by David Sinclair. It's about genetics, longevity, and NMN. So that's anti-aging supplements. What do you make of that? Do you think that's an opportunity we should jump into or look into a little bit more?
I think it's very important because things are being learned about longevity today that we didn't know 5, 10, 20 years ago. And I also am a fan of these kinds of books to read. What are the new developments? What kind of vitamins do you have to take? Do you have to fast? Do you do intermittent fasting, which is one of the things that's very important now in the longevity area? I recently read a book called The Longevity Paradox, which is very interesting ideas about vegetarian diets and so forth. All the answers are not out, but there are a lot of things you can do in order to make your life enjoyable and healthy. And it's quite remarkable, the advances that are being made in this area.
So you encourage more insight and more research into that?
Yeah, definitely. It's an incredible area because it's not only about lengthening your life, but it's also about making the life that you live happier. Because if you're not healthy, you're not going to be very happy rather. So healthy and happiness go together.
I know friends who work in the same industry and they do take them. Is that something that you would consider doing or encourage people to just experiment with? Yes,
I encourage people to do that. For example, new advances in vitamin therapy are very important. Vitamin D, for example, large doses of vitamin D are good for you. Vitamin C, of course. And there are a number of these advances that are really opening up new doors to longevity.
All right, one last question. Do you have any tips, recommendations for our investors listening today?
I think the first recommendation is, first of all, don't be afraid of investing in times when things look bad, because the best time to invest is when everyone else is despondently selling. That's the first piece of advice. Second piece of advice is make sure that you're diversified. In other words, don't put your eggs all in one basket. Be globally diversified. And thirdly, have faith in equities. Because at the end of the day, if you invest in good equities, good companies, you actually have managements that are looking after your wealth. So it's a way of getting the help of some of the best people in the world.
What's your outlook for 2023?
I think the outlook is very good because you're seeing a situation where increasing competitive pressures around the world will mean more and more innovation, and globalization is not ending. It's actually expanding. More and more emerging markets around the world are being encompassed with the entire technological advance that we've seen globally. So I'm very optimistic.
Brilliant. Well, on that note, thank you so much, Mark.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoy the rest of our forum.
Thank you.
And for those that were watching, thank you and goodbye.
You've been watching CLSA Research.